This is the theBreaker.news podcast for the week of February 26th, 2023. I'm Bob Mackin, publisher of theBreaker.news and host of the theBreaker.news podcast. Welcome to edition number 279. The Breaker is your source for news, opinion, and analysis about British Columbia issues, institutions, and influencers. Later, I'll tell you how you can support The Breaker. On this edition, headlines from the Pacific Rim and the Pacific Northwest. I award a virtual Nanaimo bar to a difference maker. Is it just me? China meddled in Canada's elections to favour the Liberals. Hear former Conservative MP Kenny Chiu react to the leaked report from Canada's spy agency. Plus, the big deal feature. The Vancouver International Mountain Film Festival is back, and I preview the Sea to Sky Infinity Loop. 2 outdoor endurance athletes went sea to sky during almost 3 weeks in summer 2022 on a nearly 600-kilometer expedition. Mark Sky is one half of the duo, and he joins me from Squamish. But first, is it just me? Is it just me, or are you shocked but not surprised after the Globe and Mail reported on a leaked report by Canada's spy agency which has evidence that Communist China interfered in Canada's 2021 federal election? The report said China wanted a Liberal minority government and that top diplomat in Vancouver, Tong Chau-ling, boasted of helping defeat 2 Conservatives and electing 2 Liberals in Richmond, BC. Canadians died in wars to stop totalitarian regimes from spreading, to protect Canada's democracy. In the 21st century, an increasingly aggressive China under Xi Jinping is undermining Canada's sovereignty. In 2021, the Conservatives proposed a foreign agents registry, but that was turned into a wedge issue by opponents. Friends of the Chinese Communist Party created a disinformation campaign on Chinese language social media, falsely claiming that Conservatives were targeting Chinese Canadians with the foreign agents registry. One of the Conservatives who lost in 2021 was Kenny Chiu. He was the incumbent, elected in 2019, and was upset in Steveston, Richmond East by rookie Liberal Parm Bains. I asked Kenny Chiu for his reaction to one of the most important Canadian news stories of 2023 so far.
It's about myself personally, because for the past year and a half, 2 years, I've been kind of reliving, whether am I hallucinating or whether it is truly. It's the amount of evidence, the number of pointers has been so much that I cannot refute that it is a significant contributing factor to the defeat, not just for myself, but also for a Conservative government. Now, having said that, I think, on Friday, people were asking if I have a feeling of, my name's being cleared and whatever, or vindicated. No, the fact still remains that Canada has not enacted anything to protect itself. We are still presenting ourselves as the weakest link, not just to the People's Republic of China, but also all the other aggressive predatory regimes that are interested in influencing us. Be it Russia or Iran or other nations. We're sending a very bad message here because with all these, think about it, Bob. I mean, this is CSIS people. They have become so frustrated that they have to be a whistleblower, leaking documents to the outside. Canada is at peril if we don't act immediately. And yet, as we hear from the committee members such as Jennifer O'Connor, it's still saying, the Liberal Party, the Liberal government has done a lot of things, like, for example, setting up committees and continue to allow reports being published as if these are actions protecting Canada.
Well, what was your reaction when you heard the Prime Minister and his reaction, which was to find the whistleblower? Instead of looking at the big picture, you wanted to know who leaked the documents.
Well, for somebody who has an admiration for the Chinese Communist regime. On one hand, we're not surprised that he would be ideologically friendly to the CCP regime, but at the same time, he had in that same question, in the answer that he provided, it revealed that he is somebody who enjoys the unchecked authority, and so for him to have somebody like a bureaucrat who is loyal and pay allegiance to Canada instead of just him, and cannot stay idly by seeing the government, report after report after report, and just sit on the report without doing anything. It's understandable that Justin Trudeau will feel angry and want to find out who's the whistleblower instead of doing something about China's or other countries' interference with ourselves.
I called and emailed the offices of Liberal MPs Parham Bains in Steveston, Richmond East, and Wilson Miao in Richmond Centre, but neither Parham Bains nor Wilson Miao responded to my requests for comment.
I do find it interesting how Parham Bains and Wilson Miao both went to an event in January 2022 to promote the Beijing Olympics in Chinatown before Lunar New Year, and they both posed for photos with Tong Chao-ling. And now that we know what we know through the CSIS report, it looks like they are beholden to her, and she's not the Consul General anymore, but beholden to that institution, the Consul General of China, which helped them get very lucrative jobs. And if we need to hear from them about what they did, what they knew, when they knew it. And so far, maybe this committee will eventually bring them in to testify, but they're not on the list yet so far.
Yeah, that's for Canadians to push and seek answers, right? I remember in 2021, during the last session of Parliament, the Prime Minister was accusing Conservatives were being racist because we want the government to come clean, tell the Parliament why, under what circumstances and conditions did the two Canadian scientists at the Winnipeg Level 4 lab were let go, under what situations were they security clearance being revoked, under what circumstances did they submit it and sent to China viral samples, and what kind of samples are these? All these questions, all these unknowns. When the Conservatives in the House start pushing that, and not just the Conservative, the Bloc also, and at the time the NDP also wanted to know. The Liberals start using the race game, the race card, and they start accusing us for being racist. Thankfully, with myself being there, and also another Conservative member of Parliament from Coquitlam, being a Korean descent, we were able to shut him down because, questioning the government, it's our rights, nothing to do with, with being racist. Member of Parliaments, they have an obligation to explain. And now that Natalie Shin and myself are no longer in the House, Conservative will continue to be labeled by these Liberals as racist whenever they ask questions that are clear and important to the country. And it's up to other members of Parliament, the current members of Parliament, to provide the information to be held accountable to our media and Canadians in general.
That was Kenny Chiu, the Conservative MP for Steveston Richmond East from 2019 to 2021. Stay tuned to theBreaker.news for more developments. What do you think? Email Bob at theBreaker.news. This is the Big Deal feature on the Breaker.news podcast. The 2023 Vancouver International Mountain Film Festival is on now. In person until March 5th, online until March 26th. Go to vimff.org for the program, the schedule, and to buy tickets for the 26th annual edition of the festival. One of the can't-miss shows is March 2nd at K Meek Arts Centre in West Vancouver. It's called Adventures in Canada, presented by Malin Ek from Sweden and Mark Skye from Squamish, multi-sport outdoor endurance athletes who founded the Outdoor Adventurers Club in 2022. They'll be showing 4 short films: Baffin Vacation, Family Roots, I Am Because You Are, and Star in the Sky. But the highlight of the night will be Malin and Mark recounting their 17-day, 575-kilometer sea-to-sky expedition. Last July, they did what they call the Sea-to-Sky Infinity Loop. My guest on the Breaker.news podcast is one half of the duo, Mark Skye, who joins me from Squamish. I started by asking him why they went on this expedition.
Initially, it started as it was a personal challenge for us and something that we wanted to tackle. So the idea was, how can we put together a trip to tackle everything, every iconic mountain, river, lake, and traverse in the entire sea to sky? And it was just kind of like a fun thing to chat about initially. But it really progressed into something much more during the COVID times when we couldn't travel anywhere. We're like, yeah, we should really do something here.
Explain the route you took, the main milestones along the way.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you like a quick rundown, even though it takes a while to still say it all. But the idea is everything is in the sea to sky. So we started at our house in Squamish. We biked the back country road called the Indian Arm Road to the top of the Indian Arm, carrying pack rafts, which are like inflatable, almost like inflatable little kayaks or inflatable rafts on our handlebars. When we got there, we inflated them and put our bikes on top so we could paddle our bicycles all the way to Deep Cove. And then we rebuilt the bikes and biked up to Cypress. From Cypress, we continued along the House Sound Crest Trail, climbing the West Lion, before continuing through the mountains and climbing Sky Pilot and descending back into Squamish. So that's kind of the bottom part of the Infinity Loop. And then from then on, we went by bike up to Elfin Lakes and continued on foot across what's called the Garibaldi Neve Traverse, where we climbed Mount Garibaldi. And we came down to the lake. Now, this is actually a cool thing I'd like to share is on day 3, as we were doing this, we found out the campground was closed. So we're like, the expedition is over. There's no way to get from Garibaldi to Black Tusk. So instead, so that we could keep going, we actually carried our pack rafts to the glacier of Garibaldi, brought them down to the lake and paddled them across the lake and went on to summit Black Tusk and then continued on foot to Whistler. From there, we proceeded to go up and summit Whistler Mountain and do the entire Spearhead Traverse in summer, which was a really amazing experience. And then continued on foot up to Wedgemount Lake, where we summited Wedge, which is the tallest mountain in the sea to sky. And then we crossed some glaciers to summit Mount Curry. So that's at the very top of the sea to sky now. From there, we went down and got on bikes, biked almost all the way back to Squamish to an area called Paradise Valley Campground, where we hopped back in our pack rafts and paddled some class 3 whitewater to Fergie's. And again, then we biked up to an area called Seagard Creek. And from there, we did what's probably the hardest and most daunting traverse of them all. We went up and did the entire Tantalus Traverse, after which we dropped down past Lovely Water into Squamish River, which we paddled the Squamish River back into town and then biked back home.
What did it take in terms of gear and food?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of fitness, both Mullen and I are generally fairly fit. I've got an adventure racing background, so I've done some expedition races in the past, and Mullen is a really strong ultra runner, and we're both very competent in mountains. Some of the trickiest things were really like logistics, like how do you piece all this together? Will it all go? Where do you leave drops? How do you move gear and material and food around? And, you know, one of the tough parts is actually this can't be done throughout the entire summer. Like there's a very small window to actually complete this loop because you have to wait until the snow melts to start on the House Sound Crest Trail, but you can't leave it too long. Otherwise it gets impossible to cross some of the crevasses like later on or do the Tantalus Traverse. So it's not something that you can actually do throughout the summer unless you want to do it just like section by section.
And when you were doing it, what surprised you the most?
I think something we really got out of it is like, we're kind of amazed at how famous the Spearhead Traverse is, which is from Whistler to Blackcomb, and how often it's done in the winter. But it's almost never, ever done in the summer. Like we could only find a couple of people that have actually done it. I'm sure it's been done more. And also the section from Wedge to Curry, again, we couldn't find anyone who's ever done it. We found one guy who done it many years ago. And like, these are just like 10 out of 10 alpine traverses that are right here in our own backyard. And we have people flying all over the world to look for traverses like this. And the quality of it is literally amazing. And it's just right here.
Did you encounter many people where you expected to see people? And were there long stretches where you just saw no one?
Yeah, the first half we've seen quite a few people. It's definitely much easier. As you progress north, it does get a lot more complicated and you need a lot more equipment and a lot more skill to keep moving. On the entire Spearhead Traverse, we didn't see a single person. The entire section going from Wedge all the way to Mount Curry, again, we've never seen a single person out there. In fact, we didn't even see anyone on the entire Tantalus Traverse, which is, we had almost every single peak completely to ourselves, which is so surprising. Like, it's all right here. Like, we're within 100 kilometers of Vancouver the entire 17 days. And you'd be surprised how few people you see. Aside from the House on Crest Trail gets pretty busy.
Were there any equipment problems along the way? Any repairs you needed to do? Were there any injuries that you had to tend to along the way?
In terms of equipment, the hardest thing was my pack raft had some sort of hole in it, and it was leaking the entire time paddling across Garibaldi Lake, which is pretty terrifying because that lake is big and it's really cold. So we had to keep like kind of myself turning around or Mullen getting her mouth around the on the valve on the pack raft and keep inflating it. So that was kind of scary. But in terms of like health and food, there was one section where Mullen actually collapsed and she literally just fell over. We'll share more during the presentation for sure. It was a combination of just not getting any food. I think I was pushing too hard, trying to move without stopping to eat. And the craziest part is Mullen was actually rushed to the hospital about just a few months before this trip due to blood clots in her chest. So she did this entire expedition with blood clots in her lungs. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how she pulled that off, but it was amazing that she did. We hoped we would be able to see a lot more wildlife. I managed to see a black bear the very first morning before we got on to the Indian Arm. And near Mount Curry, it was actually an amazing experience. We got to see like a family of mountain goats. And they were just kind of standing up on this ridge, like all standing next to each other. And just, I don't know if they were watching us. We felt they were watching us, but they just stood there and we sat there for ages. And it was, you know, you spend so much time in the mountains out here and it's actually hard to ever see mountain goats. And it's an amazing experience.
What about any of the impacts of the 2021 heat dome, the forest fires or floods? Did you see any environmental damage that looked very recent?
In terms of recent, I mean, something that was a bit dated is the glaciers from photos we've seen from way in the past are much different today than they were 5, 10, 20 years ago, especially 20 years ago. And yeah, we had a big obstacle with the snow melting like really fast this summer that flooded out entire areas around Lake Garibaldi that forced us to completely change our route.
And what can people expect when they go to your presentation March 2nd at K-Meek Center?
I encourage everyone to come because it's going to be a really fun presentation and it's just going to be much more intimate. We'll be on stage, Mullen and I will be sharing photos and a lot more of the intimate sort of stories from the actual expedition. Yeah, it's going to be such a fun night. And we're also going to be having tons of shirts. We've got, we're using this as a fundraiser for BC Parks just in the local area. So look forward to kind of sharing a little bit more about that during the evening. And yeah, it's just going to be a really fun, intimate evening. And we'll open it up for Q&A and both Mullen and I will be there. So if you want to chat to us during intermission or after the show, we'll hang around, answer any questions. If anybody else wants to try and do maybe not the entire Sea to Sky Infinity, but portions of it will be there. Feel free to come up and chat with us. We'll share everything we can with you guys.
I mentioned earlier how the film festival over the years has showcased people adventuring in far-flung places of the planet. But yep. Could this be the start of something for you where you go to other parts of the planet to tell your story about the Sea to Sky Infinity Loop? Could you take this on tour, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, if people want to hear about it somewhere else, we'd love to share. We are I'm not sure how much we'll share it in other places, but we are starting another expedition ourselves in June that we'll also be announcing at VIMF next Thursday. And this next expedition, imagine the Sea to Sky Infinity Loop, but instead of 17 days, imagine 20 months. And I won't say too much more than that, but it involves many countries traveling by human power only, and it's going to take about 1.5 to 2 years to complete. So we'll be sharing that announcement that evening too.
That was Mark Sky, who will appear along with Malin Ek on March 2nd at the Vancouver International Mountain Film Festival. Go to vimff.org for all the information. Also go to the outdooradventurersclub.com to learn more about Mark and Malin and their outdoor adventure pursuits. What do you think? Email Bob at theBreaker.news. It's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Around the Rim. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Rim. The Taiwan news. Taiwan marks anniversary of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Ukrainians, sympathizers from Taiwan and overseas, and local politicians gathered at Taipei City's Liberty Square on February 25th to mark the first anniversary of the Russian invasion. The Taiwan Stands with Ukraine event began with a minute of silence for the victims of the war, followed by the Ukrainian national anthem. Participants also hope that Taiwan is spared invasion by Communist China, Russia's closest ally. Xi Jinping has threatened to take over self-governing democracy Taiwan. In Kyoto news, 60% of animal cafes in Japan harbor exotic species according to a study. The cafes allow customers to pet animals, such as owls or hedgehogs, or watch them close. Some even sell them. There were 137 such stores as of 2019, with the popularity of the cafes and demand for the animals potentially triggering overhunting in their native habitats. The Sorbonne University study found 419 different species and 3,800 individual animals being exhibited, of which 9 species and 53 animals were banned from trading under an international treaty. In Hong Kong Free Press, jailed youngsters corrupted with anti-government sentiment during prison visits, Hong Kong security chief claims. Secretary for Security Chris Teng claimed that some prison visitors have unyieldingly used different means to corrupt youngsters jailed over offenses linked to the 2019 extradition bill protests. Some dedicated prison visitors had paid 395 visits to 59 prisoners since the beginning of the 2019 unrest, while some visited 47 inmates 211 times over the past year and a half. The visitors had no personal connections with those inmates. That's Around the Rim on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast. Now it's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Cascadia Calling. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Northwest. In the Oregonian, a Portland City Commissioner banned tent and tarp distribution. Then it snowed 11 inches. Commissioner Rene Gonzalez defended his controversial proposal to temporarily bar Portland Street Response employees from distributing tents and tarps to unsheltered Portlanders. 2 homeless Portlanders have died and 30 people have been injured in 1,300 fires involving tents at homeless encampments since Portland Fire and Rescue began tracking them in 2019. Just 60 of the reported fires, less than 5%, were caused by a heat source being too close to a combustible, such as a fire too near a flammable material like a tent or tarp. In King 5, local mental health team training Ukrainians to treat unseen wounds of war. Washington psychologists are training Ukrainian community leaders in trauma and psychological first aid. They were invited by the Consulate of Ukraine in Seattle to train teachers, church leaders, and medical and military personnel. A book set to be a roadmap for healing is in the works, and 800 people have gone through the training, which will likely spread. In the Times Colonist, new Royal BC Museum Archives building price tag now $270 million, up $93 million, to open in summer 2026. Escalating budget and delays for a facility in Colwood reflect rising cost of materials and labor amid global inflation and an extended project schedule, the provincial government says. Construction is expected to start this summer in Colwood's Royal Bay neighborhood. The entire capital cost of the facility is $270 million, an increase of $45.6 million from the province's most recent estimate in June 2021, and $93 million over what was presented in the April 2021 budget. That's Cascadia calling on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast.
Don't matter what color you are, 'cause love will conquer hate, so you won't stand alone, you won't stand alone.
The virtual Nanaimo Bar, brought to you by Spruce Hill Contracting. Every week we end the Breaker.news podcast on a tasty note by awarding the goodness of a virtual Nanaimo Bar to people making a difference. A virtual version of the province's favorite dessert bar goes this week to the Canadians who have welcomed strangers from Ukraine into their homes, giving them a place of refuge since Russia's army illegally invaded their homeland on February 24th, 2022. You can nominate someone for a virtual Nanaimo Bar. Send me an email to bob@theBreaker.news. Spruce Hill Contracting, custom homes and renovations. Find more information at sprucehill.ca. That's it for the Breaker.news podcast for the week of February 26th, 2023. I'm Bob Mackin. Thanks for joining me. Did you know that on the 26th of February in 1952, Vincent Massey was sworn in as the first Canadian-born Governor-General of Canada? Now you know. Send me your feedback. Send me your story ideas to bob@theBreaker.news. Bookmark theBreaker.news. You can also find us at theBreaker.ca. Sign up for the email newsletter and get updates to your inbox. For news as it happens, follow The Breaker News on Twitter and visit theBreaker.news on Facebook. You can support The Breaker for as little as $2 a month. For more information, go to patreon.com/thebreakernews. That's patreon.com/thebreakernews. Until next week.